I'm Jay, I'm the Chief Executive of IMI. I helped start the company about 15 years ago when I was in venture capital, and for the last 5 years I've been running the business. What do we do? We're a software business, so we do software and services around the world. I've got about 750 odd people around the world, and we broadly sell software to the list of clients that are there. Largely big telcos, big banks, big utilities, and we provide them with software that helps them communicate with their customers on digital channels. So over SMS, over email, over push notifications. And I'll be going into different case studies of what we do for each of our customers. We have offices so the HQ is in London, in fact in Farringdon. We have a big development centre in Hyderabad, in India, and we have sales offices in Dubai and Atlanta. In terms of what we do, at its very core, most of our organisations are very large organisations that have very diverse customer bases. So they would have everybody from the age of 18 to 99, people who are very tech savvy, people who are not very tech savvy. Some people use certain handsets, others use other handsets. And broadly, they have a very large communication problem to actually talk to those customers. And we provide them with essentially a set of tools and software for them to engage with their customers. The market that we're in is this broad market for mobile communication. I was at the conference in Barcelona in the last couple of days, and the headline for that conference was "Mobile is everything." Now, that's quite a claim for a conference, but when you actually see what's going on in the industry with regards to the number of devices that are being introduced, the work that Google, Facebook, and others are doing in the industry, there is a revolution going on in how consumers are actually interacting with companies. And that revolution is driven largely by smartphones. And smartphones essentially are computers in their customers' hands that can broadly do everything that you could have done through a very expensive computer 10 years ago. And we essentially help them simplify communication to those users. And again, just some stats here. And one of the reasons why we exist is that the challenge for business is actually quite complex. This picture here is a picture of the possible communication channels to a customer. So some 18-year-olds or 24-year-olds will have a selection of those different channels on their phone to actually talk with their brands or with banks or with operators. And the challenge for our clients typically is how do they basically organize themselves internally to manage communication when communication itself is fragmented so much. So if you look at 20 years ago, a lot of communication that was personalized was through direct mail. So you would get essentially a letter in the post, and it went from being "Dear customer" to "Dear Mr. Smith," and it started getting personalized. And you've had this journey from print to email to SMS to in-app push to the apps they've created to traditional voice. Now that creates quite a lot of a challenge for our customers as to how do they manage that communication and use the channel of choice for their customer. Because some people prefer email, some people prefer one of these messaging apps, and we basically provide a set of tools that sit between an enterprise system and the channels that they want to use and customers. Just very briefly on the technologies that we have. So we have a cloud infrastructure, and our cloud infrastructure sits in data centers across the UK, India and Atlanta, and some across Africa. That cloud infrastructure is connected into lots of different operator groups. It's connected into voice infrastructure, so voice lines to make phone calls. It's connected into social networks, so people like Twitter and Facebook, they have interfaces called APIs. They enable us to send messages into their systems. So we have a cloud infrastructure that has all this connectivity that essentially allows us to reach customers. On top of that cloud infrastructure, we then have a series of products. And it's those products that we actually sell to our customers. So we have a product called IMI Connect, which is, we call it a cloud communication platform. And by a cloud communication platform, it exactly does that. It helps our customers communicate with their customers using a cloud infrastructure. We then also have a series of applications, end user applications, which are software applications. One called IMI Campaign, that's targeted towards marketeers. One called Digital, which is targeted towards new business initiatives. Chat to customer service agents. Social to certain broadcasters. and Textlocal to SMBs. I'll just take you through each of these in turn. So IMIcampaign broadly helps marketeers. So in a marketing department, they are looking to essentially send out marketing messages. Now that could be either through email, through SMS, through push channels, and we essentially provide a product that either our customers use or we use on their behalf to generate those messages and communicate for a marketing need. And that might be to cross-sell and upsell certain services. Connect is a product that we sell to the IT organizations, so typically banks, utilities, where the user of that is an IT person. So typically somebody who's in the development part who's actually used to using APIs and used to using a much more technical product than the marketeers. Digital is a product that we use to create where we have a content management platform in the cloud, and we have a way to basically surface that content onto mobile devices. So again, if you go to an app or if you go to a mobile internet site, you will see now that those screens are optimized for your device. So they go big, large, small, based on the device you've got. All the technology behind that kind of work we do through IMI Digital. We have Chat, which is a relatively new product that we've actually launched for contact centers, which again allows contact centers to chat through text with their customers. Social is an inbound product that the broadcasters use to engage with their audiences, and Textlocal is a product for SMBs. Now, typically, most of the brands that I'm showing here and on the first page, we're working with typically very large organizations where they're paying us 7 figures a year per annum recurring to actually use our products. Just take you through some of the actual customers and user cases. IMIconnect, there's a picture of it there, but broadly it helps IT departments to digitize and mobilize existing services. So the kind of things that they would do is, for example, you probably received a notification that says, we've seen that you've taken £10,000 out of your account, was it you? Now that's basically a message sent by your bank. The bank in its systems has had a trigger that says there's a £10,000 transaction. Let us check with the customer whether or not it was the customer. Now in order to actually do that check, it has to flag it up in their system. It comes into our Connect product. That then sends a message out to the customer that says, was it you? Yes, no. Depending on whether you say yes, no, it carries out different logic in our platform. If it's yes, fine, it's ignored. If it's no, we would then transfer it as a suspect transaction up to the call center or just up back to a system to actually close down the account for a while. So there's a lot of, you might call it the logic to deal with what the customer actually responds to is held in our system. Now we do this across, for one of the high street banks in the UK through hundreds of services. It's not just so fraud alerts is one service, mortgage status applications. Whether you've gone from applied to approved. Another one that we've done for them is they do warm-up SMSs so that before they call you, they send you an SMS so that you're ready for their call, so that their call centers are more efficient. Connect's also used for outbound voice notifications to remind people that they've got an appointment tomorrow and that they should turn up for their appointment, and if not, to change their appointment. You probably had parcel notifications where the parcel says, leave it with my neighbour to reschedule it. Now again, that conversation, which is quite a simple conversation, it still needs to be developed and programmed somewhere. The same product was used to launch a service in India for the government, which was essentially, again, one touch point across mobile apps, an IVR line, so it's usually a voice line, an SMS line, a mobile internet site, where the citizens can come into any of those different contact points, touch points, and then essentially communicate with departments of government. And again, our platform sits in the middle between all the different channels. So, we do SMS, clearly, which is a very effective channel for certain types of communication. We do email, voice, in-app push notifications, real-time messaging, apps. We're channel agnostic because ultimately we recognize that consumers themselves use different channels based on what they're actually doing. So our customers want us to have just one system that is channel agnostic, so they can manage all the channels through our system. We think the public sector obviously is ripe for these kind of platforms because most of the citizens, clearly all have different variations in how tech savvy they are. Another example of Connect was you may have had appointment reminders, gas engineers, service engineers who are coming out to see you. You can reschedule the appointment. And again, it's not just text, it's voice as well, because obviously not everybody has a phone that does text, not everybody responds. So voice is still something which, some people have fixed lines, but Centrica essentially have only one system for appointment scheduling. So again, we use the channel of choice for them. Campaign is a product for marketeers. Our biggest customer for that is O2. So O2 and a lot of big operators, the challenge they have is that typically big organizations have many departments and P&Ls. So O2 have got a postpay, prepay, Wi-Fi, dongles. They sell lots and lots of different things to different customers, but they have essentially one customer list. Most of the marketing managers in each of the P&Ls wants to use a digital channel. If they did not control it, you'd get bombarded with messaging from O2 all over the place. So you probably already do. Right? Hopefully it's more controlled than the other operators, because what O2 do, essentially they set their business rules in our platform, in IMI Campaign, that should mean that customers are only touched with certain types of messages at a certain frequency cap. Certain messages, for example, price increases, is a regulatory requirement, and that obviously has a fast lane, and price increases go straight through, regardless of whether you've had a message or not.
Got one today.
On a price increase, right? Okay, so other messages, for example, if the prepay guys want to sell you a certain package, a family package, well then you won't be on the list for a marketing communication from another department. Your propensity to respond or not is taken into account when they send you a message. The channel you respond to, whether it's email, whether it's SMS, whether it's voice, again, all these things are calculated so that the actual communication is optimized. We do obviously a huge volume, and essentially, for most of these clients, we tend to then be the exclusive provider of digital comms, because we keep the single customer view of which customer got which comms at what time. Otherwise, again, it sort of defeats the purpose of having a single system. One of the more interesting things we did for O2 in the last 6 months was a Geo-targeting campaign, where they obviously through their servers know exactly where everybody is on their network. And again, based on that data and us interfacing into their systems, so they've got a network vendor called ZTE, which is a Chinese infrastructure vendor. We'd be looking at the ZTE servers, something like 20-odd thousand events per second, are being looked at, matching that against our database of campaigns and who they want to target. And this was all about basically targeting groups of people whose contracts are coming up. So post-pay contracts, after 3 years or 2 years, when your contract comes up, there's a big sort of fight amongst everybody to try and get your next contract. One way that the operators do it is they give you a new phone, and then you sign up for another contract. This was designed to target you at the right moment that you were within a geo-fence of a particular store, so that you can actually pick up your new phone in that store. It was only maybe 100 meters away or 200 meters away. Now that is actually, so I think it just sort of served to illustrate that that's highly personalized, because it's based on the fact that you're coming out of contract, you're close to a store, and then there's a certain time window in which they need to get that message to you, so you might actually go into store and renew. Part of the growth last year in the UK came from the fact that we now have EE as a customer. With O2, we have a managed service where we provide them software and some people. With EE, they're using exactly the same system and just the software. They've got a team up in Darlington of 15, 20, 30 people that will use our systems to personalize and essentially run a whole range of campaigns. It's not just that it's email, it's highly personalized, highly targeted emails that are essentially interfacing into many systems to actually do the personalisation.
So how do your margins differ between, say, just the software sale and the situation where you've got 15 people, I think, said, for them?
The biggest difference in margins is when we work for operators or for non-operators. So we also sell a system into Betfair and IKEA and a bunch of other consumer-facing organisations that don't have a network. So in those cases, our margins are lower because clearly, we're having to pay for the SMSs or for the email or for the last mile or for the voice. Whereas when we work with an operator, we typically work on very high margins, 80% plus, because they have a network, and therefore the cost of the infrastructure is theirs. So we don't charge them for that.
Sorry, can you just explain what you say about the former clients you mentioned, that you are paying for the text?
Yes. So for non-operators, so half our business is working with operators. The other half of the business is essentially working for banks, utilities, and consumer organisations. In those cases, when we supply a solution that involves sending a message via SMS, there is an SMS cost to us.
Why is it to you and not to the client?
Because they're using our infrastructure, because essentially they are using the fact that we are going to terminate that traffic across where the customer is. So for example, if the banks had to do it themselves, they would have to interface with every single operator or do what we do, which is they have 1 million messages they want to send out. They send them to us. We then terminate with an operator group and essentially are passing on the SMS cost to them with a additional software cost and services cost as well.
So it is pass-through rate plus?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I mean, there's a margin on the infrastructure and then there's a software margin.
But you're obviously getting more revenues.
For sure. Yeah, and it's one reason why, because the margins differ so much, it's one reason why you'll see that in all our reporting, we talk about gross profit, because gross profit strips out the cost of infrastructure. So gross profit is our pure software and services revenue. So between revenue and cost of sales is the cost of infrastructure that essentially we're incurring on behalf of certain clients. IMIdigital is where we have a content platform in the cloud, and we have essentially a range of digital touch points. It could be apps, it could be mobile internet sites, where our clients are typically selling content. So the content could be everything from music to videos. SMS alerts are still quite big in certain countries. And we work with largely the biggest guys in Africa, MTN, who are Africa's largest operator group. We work with Vodafone in India and in the UK and in South Africa. And broadly, we host their portals. And when consumers buy something, we get a percentage of what they buy. This business has been growing pretty strongly across Africa because that's where there's still a lot of growth in mobile content through operators. In the UK and the US over the years, Apple and smartphones have essentially taken away that revenue from operators. We don't see that happening in the emerging markets for quite a long time because credit card penetration is not that high, and therefore the only place where you can get micro billing for any of these services is through the operator phone bill. IMIChat is a product that allows call center agents to basically have a case and chat with customers over a chat interface. SMS, inside an app, Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp have recently said they're going to open up their platforms as well for enterprises to communicate with their customers. We see that as something which should be a good growth area. The return on investment is very good because essentially you've got one customer service agent that is able to chat to multiple people at the same time and close off customer service issues to stop people calling call centres. Social, this was for the BBC, where they essentially have an outbound channel, which is broadcast, but they engage with their audiences. So if any of you listen to Radio 5 Live, 85058, or watch Question Time, BBC, #BBCQT, all that audience interaction across the different channels, so it could be across Twitter, Facebook, SMS, voice, comes into a centralised platform for the BBC then essentially to use that engagement in their shows or respond to it or put it on their website.
Jay, can I ask you about that? I use that with Global.
Yep.
And the thing I've sort of always wondered about is why doesn't Global, or the BBC, develop this themselves? because it does seem a good product. I use it, I think it's good. But why don't often broadcasters have quite geeky engineers who enjoy developing this stuff for themselves? It struck me as something that would be reasonably straightforward for broadcasters
to develop it once is fine, because ultimately most software, you put 30 engineers in a room and you can develop it, right? To sustain development over a period of time, there is an economy of scale to someone like me doing it for many customers rather than them doing it for themselves. I mean, you know, the bank's software engineers that we work with, they've got great software engineers. On average, they get paid more than my software engineers, and they could probably develop what we've got. However, for them, there's no economy of scale because they're not reselling it. For me, we basically provide a platform so for example, let's say that's a good example, the BBC. Twitter changes its APIs every 2 or 3 months. It changes how you interface with it every few months. So unless they keep people constantly on the case, you know, for example, with the operator networks go down all the time. I mean, we don't see it as often because we're not using the networks all the time. But for organisations like the BBC, where they are using networks 24/7, they need an operational centre, which we have, which says, actually, wait a minute, you're not going to get any traffic from T-Mobile in the next hour because they're doing maintenance and their networks are down. So now that operational service, again, they could replicate, but there is an economy of scale for us doing it, for them, for global, for the banks, for the utilities. There's a natural aggregation position across all these different networks for people like us and our competition.
Yeah, so, and maybe for compliance, for competitions and things.
For competitions, for sure, yeah. But also just the operational support. I think they could obviously do it. Also, just look at it from the perspective of Vodafone. They do not want every single possible utility, bank, broadcaster connecting to their systems. They're not going to give a contract out and try and manage that sheer number of customers. So they like the fact that people like us handle customers on their behalf, because a lot of the money still goes back to the networks. So I mean, there is a point of aggregation and an economy of scale to having cloud systems that handle all this. Textlocal was a business that we bought about 15 months ago, which does a lot of what we do in some of our other products, but does it largely for SMBs. By SMBs, it's everything from people spending £1,000 a year up to maybe £100,000 a year. Classic example for me was Travis Perkins was one of the accounts that I know that as IMI years ago we were struggling to really try and sell into at a profitable price, whereas these guys could actually do it at a lower price because the needs were not as great. And so they've got a model which is much more of a self-service model. So you can essentially go on with a credit card, buy credits and just essentially get going. And that is growing pretty strongly. They've got hundreds of thousands of businesses on the platform. One of the other reasons for buying it was that we obviously also operate in India and across the emerging markets, where we see that there are just huge numbers of SMBs. We see that they are all getting connected. They all have a need to communicate, and I think that we've got the best product from a usability standpoint in the marketplace, not just in the UK, but probably outside of the US. And so we've launched that in India 3 months ago. Got 1,000 customers quite quickly onto it. We're going to be launching across different territories, but the core development still takes place in Malvern. In terms of how we make money and how we get paid, so we have managed services where we essentially are providing the software plus services. I use the example of IMI Campaign where it's basically a managed service where we've got 2 or 3 full-time equivalents plus the software, and there's a monthly fee based on the number of full-time equivalents and volume that they want to put through the platform. Another client where they use it themselves, and it's just a function of volume. And the same product has also been put inside an operator's firewall, where they essentially will then take a traditional 5-year software license with an annual maintenance charge attached to it. So broadly, half of our business is where there are individuals that we have helping our clients use our software. 40% is they use it themselves, and then 7% is where we've actually put it on premise behind a firewall, and it's a traditional license model. We definitely prefer the managed service and the software as a service because it just means that you can really have a ongoing dialogue with your customer, on a monthly basis. Again, those two we bill monthly, right? So the managed service and the software as a service is a monthly bill. It's a sign of a good business that every month we bill them, to a certain extent, it's not committed. I mean, it's one thing which I get asked often. For me, it's reoccurring. They're not committed to using the platform, but typically the uses they put it to, sending out alerts, statements, engineering appointments, emails, are things that reoccur.
Could you talk a little bit about your customer retention rates?
Well, we don't tend to lose that many customers. And what tends to happen is services go up and hit a certain plateau, and they either continue or over a period of time they go down because of some change in the business. I think getting new customers, you probably see over the last 18 months. I don't tend to we don't tend to put out announcements every month that we sign up a new customer because the pace at which customers come on is also it takes time. I'd say we've got 25 clients that spend more than $500,000 per annum on a reoccurring basis, and 15 that do more than $1 million. So it takes time to get them. We typically go through tender processes. Even though we may have helped write the tender, it's still a tender process, multiple stakeholders. With operators, it's typically a 3-year contract. With enterprise, it's typically a 2-year contract on a monthly recurring. What does happen though is at the end of 2 years and at the end of 3 years, there's a contract renewal where it's price competitive, and as long as we're at market, we don't tend to lose anybody. In the last 6 months, we also acquired a business in South Africa called Archer. Archer is a business that actually sends out bank statements and payment reminders and comms for banks and utilities by MMS. So MMS is a technology that has worked here at times, but we're not as familiar with it. But in South Africa, the infrastructure allows MMS to work, which broadly it's a small sort of rich media file, so you can see a picture with your bank statement on. One of the major reasons for buying the business is because it gives us access into the banks across Africa, because they've got essentially they've got a good list of banking clients which we think we can cross-sell into. They also have capability around creating essentially very short form video for utilities. So one thing which we think will happen in the UK in the next few years is there will be a lot more video used in general, and some of that video will be around statements and letting consumers know how to use certain appliances or not use certain appliances. And we think they've got a skill set that we think we can use as well. So based in Joburg, 50 people, roughly $8-9 million of revenue, and profitable. The last results we had in the 6 months to September, revenue was up 29%, but that's essentially included acquisitions. So organically, the business splits between Europe, Africa and India quite markedly in terms of the organic growth. The organic growth in Europe was 20%. It's been broadly between 10 and 20% for 6 years, 5 years, or 5 or 6 years that we've had a decent business in Europe. I think that's roughly a sustainable level of growth going forwards. The business in Africa, we have the managed service business and the license revenues in Africa. The managed service business grew 50%. In the same period, but licenses that we had last year did not repeat because last year we had some very good licenses, and so we're probably back down to the run rate of license revenues in Africa in the first half. And then in India, the business declined by about 15%. The regulator there has really put a few years ago put the squeeze on the operators in how they were bringing customers onto the services. So operators were essentially selling services, data packs, content packs, and essentially customers were signing up at times and then complaining they didn't know what they were doing. So they've introduced the idea of a double opt-in. So you get essentially, are you sure? Yes. Are you sure again? But what they did there was they forced the industry to have essentially 2 servers, one managed by the operator, a third-party server, so that they can essentially audit all operator services being taken on. That's taken about 2 years to implement, and during that period, there's been a decline in revenues. We think that probably is now the sort of bottom of it, and going forward, we should have growth.
Sorry, one contract you had for governmental services in one state of India, is that something you see replicating across other?
Well, yeah, for sure. No, I mean, there's a big push by Modi around this idea of digital India and smart cities, and I mean, across the world, governments are talking about smart cities and sensors and mobile and whatever else. We think that there is definitely money there that essentially comes from taxation via the government to fund these projects, but the time frames are going to be long. Now, this project we implemented just won the Gold Award at the UAE Global Governmental Summit. I mean, I could go on about.
It just strikes me as a particularly good reference.
Oh no, it's a great reference. But I don't. I mean, there's no bit of me that sits there and thinks it's going to be easy or quick, because working with government now, how we do it to scale it is going to be the interesting challenge for us, because we might be able to do it with other partners. So in India, we're working through some of the bigger infrastructure partners who build smart cities and who build, who've got hundreds of thousands of IT engineers to say, here's our component, put it into your solution. The time frames for the tender processes are just very, very long. I mean, we're involved in lots of tender processes. There'll be a 6-month tender process, there'll be a 6-month selection process, and then a year of implementation, and hopefully we'll get paid at the end of it. But it's something which we're in. Clearly, across the next few years, there will be opportunities in those markets, and not just in India. I think we think across Africa and other places as well, because they don't have legacy infrastructure in the way that we do in the UK. In the UK, we're working with Capita, working with Fujitsu, but it's a very fragmented ecosystem in the UK for procurement of IT. So even though we're working maybe with Capita and Northumbria trusts for delivering certain benefits, it can't be spread out across the 30 trusts easily, because it's just, and so it's not. I think we might get better. In the end, it'd be better for us in the emerging markets where there's no legacy vendors or issues than maybe here. But we are trying here as well, for sure. Now, gross profit 23%, cash, good cash, operational highlights. But again, 60% of the business is Europe and the US. 27 is the Middle East. 13% is now India. So India is sort of, in some ways, the decline has meant that it's a low percentage of the total. I think we're broadly happy with all the different metrics that we can grow. I mean, the main measure for us is gross profit. Internally, everyone's measured across gross profit. We do think we've got some operating leverage on EBITDA as we go forwards. We are still in, I think, an investment phase where we've put people down on the ground in the US to try and expand into the carriers in the US. We've got initiatives like the government initiative. We've got a few other initiatives that will pay off, we think, eventually. So for the time being, EBITDA's largely just tracking the other metrics, but I think in time, we'll benefit from some leverage there. It's a strong balance sheet. All the receivables, again, I think the receivables, one thing which we're also very conscious of, the AIM seems to be littered with a lot of mobile businesses that didn't quite get anywhere. I think one... No, but it's clearly impacted perception of us. And that's, and not in a good way. Right? So, but the thing that I try and get across to investors is you should look at who the companies trade with. My receivables book, 90% of it is the big Fortune and the big FTSE businesses. So it's Vodafone, it's MTN, it's big companies where we have a direct contract with them. They have bought something. We are going through the usual cycle of POs and getting paid by these companies. What I've seen with a lot of the companies that have come on AIM at times in mobile, they're largely agency businesses, or they're businesses that don't have direct relationships with their customers. It's a tick in our box that we have direct contracts with all these big organisations. The cash at the end of the period, 13.5. I think it's worth saying we've got very, I think, clean accounting kind of policies, because I've seen a lot of people capitalising software and development, and we've broadly since 2010 generated £30 million of free cash, which excludes capex, and that's essentially this on the balance sheet. Plus we had about 6 or 7 of debt in 2010 because we'd leveraged, and then we've essentially bought businesses for cash of about 15-16 million odd. Myself and a few of the other guys, we own ordinary shares in the business, and therefore cash generation for us has been quite an important thing over the years. So that's one thing which you'll see us again, gross profit growth, cash generation, and then essentially return on capital employed is what we actually do as a business for all projects. Growth strategy, I think we're pretty excited about what's happening in mobile. We think we've got a great product in IMI Connect. There's a need for companies to respond to consumers changing their behaviour, and I think we're well placed for that. We have started taking some of our products into new geographies. So I mentioned Textlocal into India. We're taking IMI Campaign into the US, and then we remain on the lookout for acquisitions. We've bought 2 in the last 18 months. But the acquisitions, typically, we're looking for client access or customer access. So if something allows us to get into more banks, we'll probably have a good look. The characteristics of the acquisitions, if they're doing monthly billing around some kind of digital communication, that's probably quite a good thing for us. And valuations obviously matter massively when we acquire businesses.
Who are your main competitors?
It varies according to the region. So in Europe, there's a business called Open Market, which is part of Amdocs. So Amdocs are a big telco reseller, and they've got a division called Open Market. SAP have got a division called Sybase that do quite a lot of messaging. There would be, again, there's some US businesses. Look at one very large one called Twilio that's venture funded, that's got a cloud communication platform. So the market for what we do is competitive. There's no doubt. And I can probably name you 30 other competitors that all are derivations on a theme. I think the way that we all differentiate each other is, in some ways, is on the depth of offering. Some of the competition I'd say, are not very good at servicing enterprise grade platforms. Because it's not just a question of buying something off the cloud and expecting a big organisation to use it. What we're good at is that we know how to work with big companies, right? So going through a procurement cycle, servicing big accounts, that all has an overhead, which I think a lot of our competitors, the smaller ones, don't. In Africa, you do have some of the network vendors, people like Huawei, who have got big offerings, and they essentially do everything that the operators will want them to do. So they're clearly competition because they're huge. And then in India, you've got a bunch of local Indian competitors. But typically, for example, for the government deal, it was between the government having an SI or having somebody build it for them, or essentially having something that works 80%, 90% out of the box. So when we really pitch in shortlists, we talk to ourselves as mobile specialists. We say, look, we're kind of a mid-market mobile specialist. IBM have got a huge mobile team. I mean, if you look at the investment they've made on mobile, it's huge. However, IBM are not going to change their systems and whatever for any one client. We will for a big client. And we're probably slightly more nimble than they are. But I don't think we're any less able to tackle anything to do with mobile communications. And then you've got a whole range of smaller venture-backed businesses or smaller, sometimes loss-making businesses that can be highly innovative, but don't necessarily have the track record to work with large companies. So we're in that kind of mid-market.
On an investment level, this is the first time I've heard about the company. I've not had any other investors mention it hardly. So give me a feel for who are the main investors in the company, how many shares they bought?
So the 2 founders who I'd backed years ago have got about 20-odd%. I've got about 5-odd%. and then the management team have got another 10 odd in options and shares. And Tosca have got 26 odd, 27 odd. Lion Trust have got a decent stake. Kestrel have got a decent stake. I think Henderson may have a stake. I'm not sure. And then Gresham House Strategic, that was a rebranded version of Spark Ventures.
Is there a chance that will get sold down? Or?
We've given them the option to sell early in the year, right? Because at one point they were wanting to sell, so we gave them an option to sell, and we had demand for it, and they decided to hold because I think they wanted to wrap an investment strategy around holding undervalued public assets. I think if they sold now, it would go against their strategy. But yeah, I think that it's clear to me that we probably need a bit more liquidity in the whole stock.
I mean, I'm just looking at the list now. Somebody else has passed it to me. I mean, your major holders and the board, and they were probably at about sort of almost 90%. So there's hardly any sort of what we would term free sort of.
And that's the way it's worked out rather than by design. I think when we had a secondary offering, it was taken up by some of the existing investors. So how we deal with that? We managed to get Investec to be our brokers in January. So now we've got a new set of brokers, and we're taking their advice on how to structure something with a bit more liquidity.
When you talked about micro-billing, you said that you were pretty confident that in Africa it would carry on for quite a long time. But the content, but the content from mobile providers has just fallen through the floor in the UK and the US, and we've gravitated to Spotify and things like that. So why doesn't the equivalent of Spotify in Africa not just sort out a micro-billing system? They'll have quite a good brand identity eventually. Why is it going to carry on going through the operators? Are we not going to experience the thing that we've got here in the UK? If it's a very simple thing for them to sort out, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Is it not?
No. Because by micro-billing, I mean, how will they collect cash from the millions of youths in Nigeria?
But you said it came via the mobile phone bill.
Yeah, no, exactly. So what may happen is they may partner with the mobile operators, for sure. So why
not do that?
So that may well happen. But the mobile phone operators themselves are going to create their own range of services, and it's not the case that necessarily Spotify and these things will sell in those territories. Spotify and Netflix, all these things. What will sell is local content. So we, for example, work with Airtel, where they have a content for their local music artists to upload content, and Airtel sells it. So there is a Spotify-like service already live. We work with Universal. They run a service called The Clique, which broadly is again local artists using a Spotify-like service, sponsored by the operator. So it's happening, but it's not the same brands. The content is different. I mean, the only thing that we've seen translates into those territories is football, Premier League. Yeah, I mean, the Premier League, Chelsea are huge in Nigeria. But otherwise, I don't worry about the US or any of the Western content types having that much market share. In India, again, if you go to India, the market share of any of the Western content guys is minimal. It's Bollywood. So
you're not worried about comparable third-party providers appearing in places like India and bypassing the network?
Not really, because I think in Europe it relied on the smartphones and credit card penetration to bypass the operators. And in these places, the smartphones are not as smart. Even for the next few years, they won't be as smart. And they will not be able to bypass the operators to get billing. And also in some of these countries, the operators can play around with all sorts of data traffic and data bundles and whatever else. It's just, the plans that most of these operators have got are predicated on them getting a slice of this big burgeoning ecosystem. We just sit there as people to help them do it. We don't buy content, create content. We just say, right, here's our platforms. What do you want to do with them? And we'll get these services live. In Africa, it's actually, what's great for us there is that there isn't as much local capability as there is in somewhere like India or in the UK. Here we've got lots of engineers and software engineers and whatever else. Africa still, there's of course engineers everywhere, but not as much. Of course,